Welcome to the Soulful Mystics podcast. I'm Steph.
And I'm Julie, and we are intuitive hypnotists, sharing our journey along the way. So this story is from a listener/client, Jessica, and she says, the spookiest thing that I have experienced occurred this summer. I was at a state park here in Minnesota hiking with my daughter. We were leaving a lookout tower when we passed a young couple coming up the steps as we were headed down. Not weird at all. Fast forward maybe 15 minutes later down the hiking trail, deep in the woods, we pass the exact same couple. There's no logical way they could have been on that trail in that location based on where we had just seen them. Not only were they the same people, they were doing the same action. He was holding a water bottle the same way, and she was putting something in her purse the exact same way. It still blows my mind and got me really thinking about what I've heard Dolores Cannon call backdrop people. I was so excited to have experienced it, as it felt like proof in a way that not only is it real, but also that I'm capable of sensing, seeing, and knowing. I love that validation for her. I love it.
But also that broke my brain a little bit. I've never heard of backdrop people, really, but to think about it, so either it was like backdrop people,
right,
or it was like a glitch, what they call a glitch in the matrix.
A glitch in the matrix, yeah.
And so my friend had asked me to go to her house and facilitate something spiritual for her friend. And so I did. And what came of that was storytelling of spiritual stuff. And one of them is a police officer. Her name is Stephanie too. And she was sitting there really quiet as other people were sharing. And I felt drawn to her in that moment. And then she says, I have something to share that I've never told anybody. She was hesitant to tell us. And I could tell that she was hesitant. And she said, we got a call from an older woman. She lived alone and she called and said, something's happening in my house. I need help. She didn't want to say what was happening on the call. So Stephanie and her partner walk into this house. There are things, I have goosebumps like head to toe right now. There are things flying everywhere. They looked at each other. She's like, I looked at my partner and we were like, what do we do?
Yeah.
How, like, there's nothing there. There's nothing. You see this old lady, she's sitting on her couch and there are literal like figurines, like they're little figurines flying around. And she said that there was even like as big as a plate flying in the air. She's like just moving and then it just smashed into the wall.
Oh my
and
God.
It was like throwing things. She said that felt like they stood there for hours without being able to speak, not knowing what to do. They couldn't call for backup. They were like, what are we going to say on the radio?
Yeah.
An invisible person smashing things in this woman's house, and the woman was very afraid, and she said this happens sometimes, never like this, and she said I'm scared. So they removed her from the home. That's all they can really do. And they brought her to a family member's house, and she was like, I didn't know what to do. She's like, I wish I knew you back then, Steph, because I would have asked you. I knew it was something spiritual. I knew it was something beyond what we can see in this scenario. They had no idea. So they just left it and they never heard from her again. So we don't know what happened. This haunted her.
Yeah.
That she didn't understand what it was and never wanted to talk about it. And it asked her, like, what did you feel in that moment? Like, if you think back, we have a museum here that's like a museum of technology. And there's this big globe, like a huge globe that has like all these electric things inside. You can see these little lightnings and you touch it and your hair goes. Well, she described it as that. She said, when we walked into that house, it felt like you're touching that globe and there was just like a static. Isn't that wild?
Oh my God, absolutely.
Okay, so Mary messaged me. She had a dream that she was at my house. She met my aunt and Max's uncle. And she's like, I don't even know if Max has an uncle.
Oh my God.
Met Emma and she sat on my lap. She took my glasses off and leaned in and looked really close at my eyes. And that's so Emma because she is mostly nonverbal. When she looks at you, she's looking into your soul.
First of all, that's Magical Mary for one thing. So Mary's been on the podcast before and she's a fan favorite. But anyway, continue. I'm just like in awe already and it's just getting started.
Yeah. So Max's uncle, they used to go fishing maybe 10 minutes past here every year, him, his dad, and his two uncles. And one of his uncles passed away the year before, or maybe a few months. And when we were first moving in here, when I was walking onto my deck, I saw a man in a chemise, like a button-up shirt. It was a plaid blue, and he was just sitting there looking out at the view on the lake. And I immediately thought, this is Max's uncle. And then my sister-in-law, who is a super gifted medium, and she came and we both walked up that same day, the same ramp. She's like, I just saw an older man wearing blue plaid out on your deck. And I was like, I saw him too. I told Max about it because his grandpa actually came to us in my old place, I think 3 times, and all 3 times was on the anniversary of his passing. And Max doesn't talk about this stuff with me or with anyone. So
Wow.
I brought it up to him twice. The first time I didn't bring it up because I never met his grandpa and it was still pretty fresh, but I've seen many photos, so I knew it was him. And he's always standing in the, let's say I was in the kitchen, the living room was right next to it. Max is in the living room. Well, he was standing in the living room facing me. So he was always in the same room as Max, but looking directly at me. And so I thought he wanted me to pass on the message. So I did the second time. And he was like, it's actually the anniversary of his passing. And then the third time, it was the same day because Max said the same thing.
Wow. That totally gave me chills.
Yeah. And so when Mary said, I met his uncle, I know it's him. So she remembers Emma being fascinated with her for some reason, and the aunts were really interested in this. And she said she did come across as spiritual. She was looking in her eyes in such a way that it felt like she could see inside, like she could really see who you really are. There's no hiding from her. And that's so true. And with her condition on her second birthday, we were all at her house for her birthday. She was in Max's arms and she looked up at him and he looked down at her and she had a seizure. And I immediately called 911. My brother Joe grabbed her and we thought she choked on something because we had no idea what was going on.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so paramedics came. We all waited for her to come back and she came back a few hours later. She had a seizure, it was her first one. And then they did keep happening. So she's 8 now and she has to take medication for these seizures for epilepsy and she sees a specialist for it. And Emma told her mom, basically in her own way of saying it, she's like, I'm not going to need those anymore. And her mom's like, what do you mean? She's like, doctor's going to say we don't need it anymore. So Alex texted me that. And I was like, okay, well, let me know when you see the specialist next because they had an appointment coming up. And yep, epilepsy is gone and she doesn't need that medication anymore.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
I know. It's
That's amazing.
it's wild how she's so in tune.
Yeah.
And my brother and Alex had her and they split up. So my brother is with another woman and he has 2 kids with her, another on the way. And their firstborn, Jade, so Emma's sister, Emma went to Alex and said she's really sad for Jade. And Alex is like, why? She's like, because her grandma's going to die.
Oh
And
my gosh.
she asked Joe if everything's okay with her name is Stephanie's mom. She ended up being diagnosed with cancer and died, I believe it was a week after Emma said that.
Oh my gosh. I have chills throughout my entire body.
Yeah.
Also, like, what do you even do with that information?
I mean, if she says something that, I don't know, that you can prevent, maybe, and that's like the other thing too, is people who have premonition dreams. It's like, do I tell the person? Or even just premonitions. I normally would say, oh, I had a dream about you. If it was a car accident in my premonition or the dream, I would just
Yeah.
say, just be mindful when you're driving, or something like that. I had a psychic once tell me to tell Max to be careful when he's using the chainsaw. She's like, I see him cutting his leg really bad. And he used to go to this place to cut trees with all of his friends and they would drink. And one of them cut off like 3 of his fingers.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so I was like, be careful with the chainsaw, and I just kept drilling it in him. And so we don't know if it would have happened, but we don't want to know that. We just need to plant the seed to like just be mindful. And yeah, so he didn't cut his leg, thankfully. But it's just premonitions are so wild. And if anyone has any stories like this, I think it's really cool to hear other people's experiences.
Oh my God, absolutely. There was this one time I had a dream about one of Jason's friends. I don't even know exactly what the dream was about. This was like years ago, but I remember waking up thinking, God, I wonder if he's okay. Like it was someone we hadn't hadn't spoken to in a really long time. And I remember messaging this person like on Instagram or something. And I was like, I had a dream about you. Hope you're doing okay, old friend. Like, whatever, whatever. And literally months and months and months later, I found out he had been in a horrific car accident. And I don't know if he ever read my message on Instagram, but I just remember thinking, like, did that happen around the same time? Because we don't live in the same state anymore. So that's kind of why like the relationships kind of drifted, but I had no explanation for it. This, random person that we haven't spoken to in years just popped into my dream. I mean, he survived, thankfully, but that floored me. That was like one of the first times anything like that had ever happened.
It's wild, eh?
Yeah. So back to Mary's dream. I
Yeah.
remember you telling me about Max's uncle on your death. And
Yeah.
also, I had a thought too when you were saying like when his grandpa was visiting you or visiting him, like in the same room with Max, but like looking at you. I feel like he was looking at you because he knew you would be the one to see him.
Yeah, he knew I could see him and he knew I wouldn't be afraid. I think Max maybe set up some boundaries that he was respecting, but it's interesting. I don't know if he chose to only present himself to me or if I was just open enough to receive his presence there. So
Yeah.
I don't know if it's our choice or if it was partially his choice as well. That I'm curious about too, because I feel like that's been coming up a lot lately. Spirits making appearances or people just opening up to their
Yes.
mediumship.
100%. That is a great segue into my story.
Yeah.
This was like a full on like mediumship experience that I had at my house. And I will also say that nothing has happened since. But what was cool about this was that multiple people witnessed me experience this in different ways. I was texting with people as it was happening. My husband was there. So I wrote down this experience and I'm just going to read it the best I can. And I'm going to try to maintain privacy as well because I do know who this spirit was and they're not related to me and I just want to be respectful. Okay, so I wrote about this on September 11th and it was at 5:42 p.m. A couple of weeks before I wrote this down, there was one morning, my husband works very odd hours, so he's usually up in the middle of the night, and he was downstairs in the basement and he hears this buzzing going off. And he comes upstairs. Turns out it was his beard trimmer, just turned itself on, but it was face down in a drawer, like nothing touching the on switch. It just popped on in the middle of the night. I was asleep. My son wasn't home at the time. It was just random. So then fast forward about a week later, I was on a Zoom call with a friend from Kinship, Tara, and we were talking about some energetic healing work that she does. And the shaver went on again. And I was the only one home at the time. This time, I wasn't able to turn it off. So like it had gone on multiple times since Jason first noticed it, but I would shut it off right away. Like there were times where I was home alone and I'd be able to shut it off. And so that went on for about 2 weeks. And then this happened that Monday with Tara, where I couldn't shut it off. It took me like 10 minutes to get it off. So then Tara, she's a psychic medium. She was trying to connect to see who it was. And at the time, we were thinking it was my grandmother because we had already been talking about her. So the next day, which was Tuesday, I woke up at 4 a.m. and I sleep with earplugs in because I'm like a super light sleeper. So I take my earplugs out. It's 4 a.m. I'm the only one home and I hear the beard trimmer going off. And I'm literally like, what the fuck? My husband was already at work. It was just me. It's 4 a.m. I don't need to be dealing with this shit. So at this point, I literally could not get this thing to turn off. All I could think to do was go put it in the garage because our garage is like right off of our kitchen. So I just set it on the step outside the kitchen door and I left it because my office is on the opposite side of the house. So I wouldn't have to hear it. So throughout the morning, I was checking on this thing to see if it was still going on. It literally buzzed for 3 solid hours before it had died. Okay. So the thing died, like the battery died. So I thought, okay, it's safe to bring this back in the house. So I did, and I put it in the bathroom. And later that morning, it turned on again without being charged. So at this point, I was like, it's staying in the garage. Meanwhile, that morning, I was texting with you, Steph, as always, and we were talking about this, and you're like, I don't think that's your grandma. And I was like, but all morning I had been getting all these signs. I was so convinced because I remember I took my dog for a walk and it was like boom, 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 like sign after sign after sign from my grandma, like all very random things that resonated so hard. So I was like, there's no way that this isn't her. But also, it's like a strange way for her to get my attention, right?
Yeah.
So, anyway, I'd been talking to you about this. And you were like, well, I can do some automatic writing, see if I can connect with her. And you connected with my grandma, and she had said that she was glad the whole thing didn't scare me. She found it amusing. And she also said, pay attention to the songs I hear in my head because that's super significant. And that was pretty much it. One time in the morning, just as a side note, this was like months ago, I was working and it was still dark in my office. And I saw like a little twinkle above my computer screen. And as soon as I acknowledged that I saw this little twinkle, the song Mr. Sandman started playing in my head. And I was like, that's really strange. Where do I know that song? And then all these memories came flooding back of like my grandma in her little choir group when I was a kid. And they would dress up in these sparkly dresses and they would sing Mr. Sandman. It was one of the songs. It was probably the only song I remember them singing. And so as soon as that memory comes, then I'm like flooded with a bunch of emotions. You saying that in your automatic writing, or my grandma saying that in the automatic writing made total sense to pay attention to the songs in my head. So Wednesday comes around, and shortly after I get off of work, I get a text from Tara saying she thinks she's connected to the energy that might be responsible for making that beard trimmer start buzzing or whatever. So she proceeds to tell me that she's been hearing a Whitney Houston song play in her head nonstop for 3 days, and the song wouldn't leave until she wrote down some of the information she was getting. As soon as she says Whitney Houston, I realize I've heard Whitney Houston play in my head randomly. And one time I know in particular was maybe about 2 months before this shaver thing started. I was a block away from my house. And a lot of times when I drive in the car, I don't turn the radio on. I don't mind the silence because I get a lot of information and downloads and things when that happens. So I'm like a block away from home. And all of a sudden I hear this Whitney Houston song playing in my head. And it's so loud. And I'm thinking to myself, like, this is really cool that I can remember these songs so clearly. But at the time, I didn't think anything of it, right? So I'm telling Tara, Whitney Houston, that's happened a lot to me too. But at the time I'm texting her this, I have no idea what song was playing in my head. It had completely left my brain. I couldn't think of the name. I couldn't think of how the song went. I couldn't even remember anything about the song. I just know it was a Whitney Houston song. So she's asking me about this description that she had written down. So she asks if I knew of a woman who passed that dressed in cutoff jean shorts, big 80s hair, brown curly hair, slender, used to drink and smoke while dancing and singing really loudly to these songs. And she was appearing to Tara as if she was in her 20s. And so I feel like that description would match a lot of people in the 80s. So that didn't really stick out to me. So anyway, I like sending it to my mom. So that evening, after I'd been texting with Tara, I'm outside with my husband. We're getting ready to grill some food and I'm sitting down and I was like, oh yeah, I wanted to go to Spotify to see if I could look up the song that had been playing in my head. I literally touched the app and before I can even type in Whitney Houston, the song starts playing in my head. So loud and so clear that I literally start singing it to my husband. And I'm like, I know who this is. So he's looking at me like I'm nuts. And so I'm in the kitchen and I see her face materialize. And this was right after I heard the song playing in my head. And it was just her face. I didn't see the hair. I could see bangs. I could see little wispies around her face, but it was just the face. And I could see the details like her smile, her lipstick, all the features of her. I knew exactly who this person was. She was a friend of my mom's. So anyway, the song was I Want to Dance with Somebody by Whitney Houston. And I remember her face was eye level, like she was leaning in really closely to me, but I could see through her face. And this is like materializing with my physical eye, which that has never happened before. Anytime I've seen a spirit or a face or something, it's been with my eyes closed in my third eye. But this time I'm seeing it with my physical eyes and I'm seeing all the details. And as soon as I'm like recognizing this and knowing who this person is, I see her mouth start to move like she's saying something to me, but I couldn't hear anything. I couldn't make out any words. So I'm thinking, okay, like I know what's happening. I'm feeling really comfortable. And also, I'm feeling blessed that this is happening to me. And I just was getting the impression that she was just kind of like playfully like smacking me. Like I wasn't feeling her smacking me, but from seeing her face, I was getting the impression she's kind of like, see, I knew you could do this. I knew I could get through to you, you know?
Yeah.
I knew you could do it, kind of a thing. That was the energy that I was picking up from her. Anyway, I'm just still blown away that this had happened. And so I'm in the kitchen. I'm seeing her face. At one point, I closed my eyes because I'm like, maybe I can get more. She was showing me pictures from when she was younger. And I think it was because she wanted me to see her hair. Photos were popping into my head. And I even remember thinking, like, gosh, she looks a lot like her family members that I know. And so I closed my eyes at one point and I'm thinking, okay, if I close my eyes, I'll get more details, I'll get more messages. But I like instantly start to feel very lightheaded, kind of like woozy. And I feel like this tingling sensation, like a cold tingle coming from between my shoulder blades and my back. It was like this icy cool sensation. And then I was like, is this her energy running through me? And then I got a little scared because I didn't want to pass out. So I opened my eyes and I mean, this has never happened before. So in my mind, I'm like, was I about to channel her like through me? I don't know.
I think it sounds like it, honestly.
Yeah. So then after I got lightheaded, I was like, okay, I'm going to sit down. And you pop into my mind because you do automatic writing a lot. And so I thought, okay, I've just got my cell phone. Maybe I can do like automatic typing because Lee Harris, he's a famous channeler on YouTube. He does that where he will channel on his phone and just write the messages on his notepad. And so that popped into my head to do that. So I sat down and I was about to start typing and I can feel my thumbs changing. They got icy and tingly and it felt like they weren't my thumbs anymore. And just as I was about to start typing, my son and his friend come up the stairs into the kitchen and totally knocked me out of that zone. So this is probably like a span of 10 minutes where all of this unfolded from like me hearing the song in my head again to thinking I know this person to going into the kitchen and seeing her face and like dead set that I know it. So then my son and his friend come up the stairs and I'm like, oh shit, okay, all right, that just happened. Holy fuck. So I go outside where my husband is still out there and I tell him everything that just happened. And I get a text from my mom. And my mom doesn't send me a message. She sends me a photo. And I open the photo of this person from when she was in high school. And my whole body is in chills right now.
Me too.
So I'm like looking at this picture and I zoom it in and I crop her face. And it was exactly what I saw, down to the bangs, her eyes, how I described her eyes, the wispies around her face, her lipstick, the way I described her smile. It was exactly her. And if you're here with me right now, hello, because I'm like buzzing with tingles all over my whole entire body. And yeah, that was a wild experience. My mom called me right away. I had to tell her because, you know, this is her friend from high school. There's other connections to this person, but I've only met her when I was a kid, you know, just a couple of times. I didn't know her very well at all. And this was after the whole Lost Souls hypnosis thing, which I'm going to have to share that session at some point. But during that session, I had released Lost Souls into the light. And then I see her a couple of weeks later and I'm thinking like, oh my God, is she coming to me because she's stuck here or something? And I'd spoken to you and I'd spoken to Kim, the person who facilitated the Lost Soul session for me. And I've come to realize, and I feel really good about this, that this person came to me because of the connections I have to her. Even though I didn't really know her in life, I think she kind of agreed to help me with opening up to this gift. And I think that's what it was. I wrote down as it was happening how I felt like she was smacking me and like, I knew you could do it, you know, like that kind of thing.
Yeah,
And
and it was fun energy.
it was fun and it was so much love. I didn't feel any sadness or anything like that. Like she had a big smile on her face. So when I say I feel really good about coming to that realization, I know in my heart that's why she came to me. She's not stuck here.
Yep. I feel like something's shifting. And if you have stories or experiences, please reach out. And I know you're listening because we have the analytics
And also, like, thank you so much for those who've been listening to our podcast and tripling our downloads, because we're still a little baby podcast. And, we get so excited when we see those numbers triple, or we see an increase in listeners, or we see the downloads are coming from different places in the US or the world.
Yeah.
We're just two little people trying to get our message out and build a community and, share what we do. And yeah, it's just, thank you.
Yeah, I did look at the analytics of where people are listening from, and I just want to give a shout out to China and New Zealand, because New Zealand is number 3, China is number 4, Australia too, number 5.
Amazing.
That's so cool.
Yeah.
If you're one of those people who are listening, send us an email. Tell us where you're from.
Absolutely. And on that note too, please subscribe to our email list. But also, we're wrapping up season 2. November, December timeframe, we take a break and we come back late January. So you might get a little something something from us, just popping in to say hey, keeping you guys updated with what's going on.
And that's it for today's episode. Until next time, stay curious.
Stay mystical.